Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Madeline Fitzgerald, and I am the manager of adult programs here at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our talk with Aleesa Pitchamarn Alexander on the exhibition East of the Pacific, Making Histories of Asian American Art. On behalf of the museum, I would especially like to welcome and thank our members who are in the audience this evening. It is because of your generosity that our collection and special exhibitions are free and open to everyone. I would like to thank the Art Bridges Foundation's Access for All program for their generous support of Second Thursdays at the Carter. East of the Pacific, Making Histories of Asian American Art is organized by the Cantor Arts Center. We gratefully acknowledge support from the Robert Mondavi Family Fund, the Terra Foundation for American Art, and Pamela and David Hornick. Funding for the conservation of 7 works in this exhibition was generously provided through a grant from the Bank of America Art Conservation Project. We want to especially thank the Carl and Marilyn Thoma Foundation and the Alice L. Walton Foundation Temporary Exhibitions Endowment for their generous support in making the Carter's presentation of East of the Pacific possible. I would also like to thank the staff at Hired Hands for providing American Sign Language interpretation for tonight's talk. Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers this evening. Dr. Aleesa Pitchamarn Alexander is the Halperin Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art and co-director of the Asian American Art Initiative at the Cantor Arts Center at Stanford University, where she has been since 2018. She oversees the collection of modern and contemporary art and is the curator of several exhibitions, including Spirit House from 2024, Livian Thirsty, also in 2024, East of the Pacific, Making Histories of Asian American Art from 2022, and The Faces of Ruth Isawa, also 2022. Co-founded with Assistant Professor of Art History, Marcy Kwan, the Asian American Art Initiative advances research, education, community engagement, and public access to the work of Asian American artists and makers. Aleesa leads the AAAI's curatorial program and collection building, working with artists, estates, galleries, and collectors. So please join me in welcoming Aleesa to the stage.
Thanks, Madeline. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening, for coming to listen to a lecture on a Thursday night. I'm very happy to be here from California. I'm so thrilled that this show is here at the Amon Carter, a museum of American art, which is particularly significant to me. And as I'll explain further, I never intended for this show to travel, even though that's like every curator's dream. So having it here, is especially meaningful to me. I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes. I thought I would give you a kind of behind-the-scenes look of things that went into the production of this show, things that don't get shared in an exhibition or usually get shared with the public. And I'll talk about some of the formation of the different thematic sections and what I was really thinking about when I was putting this project together and how it relates to the work that I do at the Cantor at Stanford. I want to say also that I'm just so grateful to Michaela for doing such a wonderful job with the Amon's presentation of the show. I think it looks particularly striking here. And so again, thank you to the Amon and to Madeline and to everybody here who's made this possible. But speaking of another museum, for those of you who have never been to the Cantor, who have never been to Stanford, please come. I'd love for you to come down to Palo Alto and see us one day. We are quite an old museum for the West Coast. We've been around since 1894, and we were founded by the Stanford family in honor of their late son, Leland Stanford Jr. So here's a little setting to ground you. And at the Cantor, where I've been since 2018, most of the work that I do is related to the Asian American Art Initiative, or the AAAI, as we call it. And Madeline gave kind of a nice introduction to this project, which is indefinite and ongoing, and was really founded when I came to Stanford and started talking to art history professor Marcy Kwan. both of us in graduate school throughout, all of the 8 years of our PhD work, we never learned about Asian American art history. We didn't really have an opportunity to do so. There wasn't anybody to guide us. There were no advisors to kind of help lead us through the field. The field was sort of there, but it was kind of dispersed over different isolated places, basically. And if you wanted to learn about it, you kind of had to cobble it together and teach yourself, which is what the both of us ended up doing. And so we thought, we wanted to make a space where we could give students the opportunity to learn about this history, an opportunity that we never had. And also considering the history of the Bay Area, as San Francisco also in particular is such a historically important site for Asian immigration. And Stanford's campus is also a site of Asian American history and has a large Asian American student population. We really felt like this was the place to do it. So we do a lot of different things. It's all housed at the Cantor, but I do the curatorial work. So I build the collection of Asian American art at the Cantor. When I started, out of 41,000 objects, we had about 33 by Asian American artists. Now we have more than 800, which is great, but, we still have quite a ways to go. I also lead the curatorial program, so I curate exhibitions from our collection. East of the Pacific is almost entirely drawn from the Cantor's collection, which I'm really proud of. But we also do special loan exhibitions, and we work with artists, and we do special commissions. And we teach courses, we produce publications, we organize gatherings. We do everything that the two of us can think of and can manage to do within our work weeks to kind of expand the field and make it accessible to the public. So this is just a picture of Marcy moderating a talk with the author Kathy Park Hong, who is the author of Minor Feelings, and her friend artist Jen Liu a few years ago. And then this is one of my most recent exhibitions, Spirit House, which is currently on display at the Henry Art Gallery at the University of Washington, in case you make it up to Seattle. So as I mentioned, the East of the Pacific was a show that was meant to really kind of announce the AAAI. It was the first major show of the initiative, and it was very tailored to Stanford's campus and the Stanford community. And that appears perhaps most strikingly at the entrance of the exhibition as it was presented at Stanford, where we wrote a land acknowledgement. Stanford has a land acknowledgement, but we rewrote one for the context of the show. So I'll read it for you now. Stanford occupies the ancestral land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. The land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. On this land, Chinese migrant laborers helped construct the university and worked in the Stanford's residence. As president of Central Pacific Railroad Company, Leland Stanford employed Chinese migrants to do the more hazardous, backbreaking work of building the Transcontinental Railroad. Between 1863 and 1869, 15,000 to 20,000 Chinese laborers helped execute one of the most ruthless engineering ventures in American history, a colonial project that displaced countless indigenous peoples and allowed the Stanfords to amass significant wealth. In 1882, the enactment of the first Chinese Exclusion Act effectively closed the door to Chinese immigrants and forced many Chinese migrants who were already living with the threat of violence to flee. So Stanford University is there in part because of the wealth that the Stanfords amassed during his time as a senator, and also through the production of the railroad. So I'm quite conscious of the fact when I'm at work of this history, and also the fact that Chinese laborers helped build Stanford's campus and the museum as well. So here's an archival photograph of a Chinese gardener working on Stanford's Palo Alto residence, and the famous last spike that was, this was a kind of false commemoration spike. It was the last spike that was supposed to be laid in the Transcontinental Railroad, but actually the more likely event was that it was one that was nailed by a Chinese worker, a nameless Chinese worker whose name is lost to the historical record. So, it's kind of a powerful context that I was thinking of, and I wanted to share that with students. I wanted to share that with visitors in case that this was new information and new history to them. There are descendants of Chinese migrant laborers who, work on campus or who are in our community. The history is very, very present when you're in the Bay Area. And that's something that I find to be very powerful in doing this work, is that it feels very much like the past is right alongside us in the present moment. One of these works in the show is a work, this is not by an Asian American artist, but by a European immigrant artist named William Hahn, of a Chinese worker in the foreground of this scene of logging. And part of the reason why I accepted this painting into the collection is because this landscape is actually very close to Stanford's campus. So it's in a kind of forested area off the 280 highway. And I thought it was quite an interesting painting. And I was speaking with Gordon Chang, who is a history professor, a very esteemed history professor at Stanford, who effectively the reason why we know anything about the history of Chinese migrant labor and the Transcontinental Railroad is because of a project that he co-led with another history professor that helped recover the stories of these laborers, even if we don't know their names, because so much was lost, so much wasn't written down. We don't have a great archival record of Chinese migrant or labor history in the region. So it really took some incredible research skills, archaeological digs, archival photographs to figure out how to piece together the narrative of their lives. But he was particularly struck by this painting by the foregrounding of this Chinese worker in the composition. He sees it as, foregrounding him above or before the white workers in the background who are seen kind of more leisurely working, and there he is front and center. And so I just thought, this painting, when I first encountered it, this really helps tell the story. This helps set the stage, even though this work itself is not necessarily by an Asian American artist. We are kind of interested in the visuality of Asian American history as a whole. So in East of the Pacific, you'll see this work in the section called Points of Contact, which is about kind of this early 20th century moment where you have a lot of influx of Asian immigrants coming in, either Chinese or Japanese, for various reasons, some to work on the railroad, but others because this is a point when Japan was finally open for trade and migration. So most of the works in the show are from a private collection that I had started working with this private collector when I first started at the Cantor. I started having email conversations with this man named Michael Brown, who was an art dealer. And when I moved to the Bay Area and it became clear that I was interested in Asian American art and history, the network of folks who are interested in that is quite small. And so it became very obvious to me that Michael Brown was somebody that I needed to talk to because he had a preeminent collection of early Asian American art or early art made by Asian artists or artists of Asian descent working in California. So it's like kind of California Asian American art. And unfortunately, throughout the course of our conversation of emailing back and forth, he passed away in December of 2019. But I kept talking to his estate. I saw this as a kind of like once in a generation opportunity to have access to works that otherwise we don't, oftentimes if people pass away and there are no heirs to the estate, like works like this can kind of just be dispersed and you don't know where they end up going. Just in the same way where he amassed some of these works of art from antique stores or from flea markets, and sometimes he got them from eBay. I mean, sometimes he did get them from dealers or galleries, but he really put this collection of, probably around 500 works that were in this public storage unit together and did something that was quite singular with his efforts. He became interested in collecting Asian American art in part because he saw that nobody else was really doing it. And because of that, it was quite affordable on the market. And as somebody who was living in the Bay Area, I think Michael also felt, too, that Asian history was something that was grossly underrepresented in museums, even though Asian American presence had been around for so long. So after he passed away, we kept working with our team. This was the middle of the pandemic, so it was like kind of it was a very hard and weird time. The museum was closed for a year and a half, so I was working from home. But it actually worked out well for me in the sense that it allowed me to kind of slow down. A lot of the time, curators are on this like hamster wheel of exhibitions that you're really just like, okay, I have to do this project, and you don't really get a lot of time to sit and think about what is it that I'm trying to do and how can I really build something and what can I do with the resources that I have. So since we weren't really working on any exhibitions, I went to this public storage unit, which is like not ideal for art storage, unsurprisingly, exposed to the elements, not temperature controlled, bugs, this and that. And I'm not trying to like critique Michael at all, because he was really, this was after he had passed away and he was doing the best that he could. This is not an uncommon sight as a curator. I have been to many storage units, and I have been to many garages and basements to find art, and there are amazing things out there. And people are doing the best they can to be stewards of this work. Sometimes they know what they have, and sometimes they don't. In this case, Michael did know what he had. And so over the course of several visits, I made a selection from around 500 objects to 141 paintings, sculptures, works on paper to bring into the collection. We set up some tables in the lot and pulled things out and did condition checks. And that's what our registrars are doing right now and taking notes. And we brought them back to the museum, and we offered the estate a sort of sum of money based on the market value of the works of art. So we had everything appraised to determine the market value of the things that I had selected. And based off of that appraisal number, which was shockingly, even to me, shockingly low, which tells you just how undervalued Asian American art has been historically, we came up with a number that was not that low, and offered it to the estate, and they accepted. And so the earliest works that we have in the Cantor's collection by Asian American artists are from Michael Brown's collection. And you can see some of these works in this image. This is in our classroom, are in the exhibition right now. And so here we are. We're mapping out the show with our exhibition designer and one of the artists. We did a little collaboration with this artist, and we were just kind of, looking at everything that we had and trying to think about what do I want to do if I was going to make an exhibition out of this. So to answer the question that I often get asked, like, how did you come up with the idea of the show? Or like, did you have this idea first? Or were you driven by the objects? In this case, I was really looking at Michael's collection and letting the objects help make the narrative for me. So the exhibition upstairs is not meant to be a comprehensive history of Asian American art in any way. It's meant to be a kind of selection of moments from different points in history, of different communities. A lot of these artists knew each other or were colleagues, or who worked together or who collaborated together. And that's kind of where everything came from. I wanted to give a kind of historical entry point, one that was very California and Bay Area focused, because that was the audience that I was looking to at the time, to just give people a kind of, a primer on an area that most people don't know much about. And most of the artists in the show, if you've seen it, a lot of people have never heard of them before, so you're not alone if that is your reaction. There's only a few artists in the exhibition who have any name recognition nowadays. I think Ruth Asawa, or Toshiku Takaezu, or Chira Obata might be some of the only people that folks know. And once again, that's just kind of a testament to the Eamon Carter to taking this project on, because frankly, a lot of museums don't love shows where nobody knows who the artists are, right? Because artists are often the draw for bringing shows in. But here, working on this material, when I started, it wasn't like I was an expert either. These were all artists that I had to take lots of time to learn about who they were, to go into our archives at Stanford and figure out some kind of outline of their lives in order to put this project together, because there's just not a lot of sources. Speaking of artists, one of my favorite artists in the show, and one of my favorite artists of all time, frankly, is the artist Bernice Bing, who was born in San Francisco, Chinatown. And she, kind of grew up alongside beat poets, and was there kind of with Bruce Conner and Jay DeFeo in mid-century San Francisco, making art. She was a student under Nathan Oliveira and Richard Diebenkorn. There's some, I think you have some Diebenkorn maybe upstairs. No? Okay. No, I was confusing with Thibaut. You have Thibaut, one of our other great California artists. But anyway, Bing is special to me in part because I learned about Bing when I was in graduate school. I think I was probably 6 years into my PhD, and I was a reader for a professor's course on the art of California, which was a new course that she had never taught before. And she started talking about this artist named Bernice Bing. And I realized when I was listening to her that all through my undergrad, all through my master's, and all through my PhD program, I had never encountered the work of a queer Asian American woman artist in my entire life, like as an academic. So she was the first Asian American woman modernist. She was gay and she was out, during that time when it was hard. I mean, she was already, Asian American, and then to be out and to be queer during that moment was, a brave thing to be. And so I became kind of fascinated with her life in graduate school. And then when I moved to, up to Stanford, up to San Francisco, this is where a lot of her community was. So I got in touch with her estate, and there were works that were still not in museum collections. And this work was given to us from the estate of Bernice Bing. And it has a really interesting life story as well, because it was made in 1966, but then Bing became the executive director of a small arts nonprofit named Soma Arts in San Francisco. And she was the first executive director of that organization. And like many artists, she had art storage problems. So she stored a lot of her paintings in the ceiling, the attic, and in different places in Soma Arts. And Soma Arts caught fire. And so she lost some of her paintings, and some of them got significantly damaged. So this was in the 90s. I think this was like mid-90s. So the image on the right is what happened after the painting was burned. But Bing was still alive. So something remarkable happened. Her community stepped up. A conservator offered to treat the painting pro bono. They put a patch on the back, and then Bing filled in the patch. So it's great because, this didn't happen after she died. So she was still alive and able to help in the conservation of the painting. Now, however, when we got the painting, this, is some decades later, that treatment began to fail. This person who was a conservator, was a very adept conservator, but, these things can kind of happen and treatments can fail, and the patch was slipping, and there was all sorts of further damage that the work had sustained that hadn't been treated since the 90s. And so when I encountered it in another public storage unit, my life in storage units, it was in pretty bad shape, but this is a painting that is from a really important moment in Bing's career. This is after she's received her MFA, and she's living out in kind of Napa wine country. And she's really inspired, as so many California artists are rightly inspired by the California landscape. So this is, in my mind, a very abstracted version of El Capitan from Yosemite. And she's doing something where it's kind of almost like combining Chinese landscape painting, ink painting, alongside the non-representational painting that was emerging out of the Bay Area in the mid-20th century. And so to me, this was just like such a perfect encapsulation of, how her work and what she was all about, and also this moment in history. And it also spoke to work in our collection, since we had, many Diebenkorns. Diebenkorn used to teach at Stanford. And many Oliveras. It was just a perfect work in conversation with our pre-existing collection. Now, some museums have painting conservators on staff. Well, we do not have a painting conservator on staff at the Cantor, and that sometimes makes our work challenging because the conservation work is quite expensive. But we had worked with the Bank of America prior on a project involving Richard Diebenkorn, actually, and many works in the Michael Brown collection were also quite damaged. And so, the hard thing in working with the Bing estate was, obviously, people think that a gift is like a tremendous act of generosity, and it is. And I'm not trying to underestimate that. But oftentimes it means that the museum is taking on a tremendous cost. You are agreeing to care for something in perpetuity, and if it is not an exhibitable condition, it is your responsibility, should you choose to do so, to bring it up to exhibition standard. So we applied for a grant with Bank of America. They have a great art conservation program grant, and we got $75,000 to treat a bunch of works in our Asian American collection, including this Bing. And, even the conservator was like, a lot of museums wouldn't have even gone through the trouble. This work was in such bad shape. And at this point in time, really not very many people knew who Bernice Bing was. So the market value of this work was less than the value or the amount that it would cost to treat it. And so that's partially why, I like giving numbers for the sake of transparency. But we really try to make an investment where we can, and it's a key work in East of the Pacific. And so a very beloved work by me and by the museum. And so I thought I would share a little bit about how we brought that work to life. And at the same time as acquiring that work, we at Stanford also acquire artist archives for our libraries. So if you're a PhD student looking to write your dissertation on Bernice Bing, you can now do so, because you can come, and any of you can come. It is open to the public, and request papers from our libraries. You can look at her dream journals. You can look at letters. You can look at sketches. They're all there in the archive for your perusal. And we have a small exhibition program at the Cantor where we make tiny focus shows of selections from Stanford's special collections of artist archives. And my curatorial assistant did a beautiful show last year of work curated from Bernice Bing's archives, which have now been fully processed at Stanford. What are we doing on time? Okay. I just get a general great. So that's... Oh, great. Excellent. Another exceptional person who I love sharing his story is Pat Hayashi. So the AAAI gets a lot of we have acquired a lot of our collection through gifts, and that is community building. Essentially, that's what we're trying to do. We try to go out there, Marcy and I, in the community and make connections with people and tell us about the work that we want to do, and tell them about the types of projects that we're interested in and the histories and stories that we want to tell. And Pat caught wind of what we were doing. And he just, cold emailed me, as I often get cold emails, and said, I have a selection of work about Japanese American incarceration. Would you like to come over and look at it? And he lives in the Oakland Hills, and he was a Berkeley, a big time Berkeley alum. So, and for those of you who are not from the region, the Stanford Berkeley thing is it's kind of a thing. I'm not a sports person. I don't understand. But it turned out to be a big deal that he was interested in talking to us at Stanford. But Pat became interested later in life in collecting work about this moment in history, in part because he was born in Topaz. He was born in a camp. This is a picture of him and his brother as children in the camps. I'm allowed to share this. We did a presentation together, and he shared this very beautiful photo. And he gave us, I think, over 20 works, some by Chiro Obata. You have a few on view, like these Henry Sugimoto lino cuts that are also on view in the exhibition. And Topaz is also where Chiro Obata, the great artist Chiro Obata, was incarcerated. And there he established an art school. So even in the face of what was happening, even while incarcerated, Japanese American artists founded art schools and taught each other, ink painting or carving, or they were making art in the camps, and Obata was one of the leaders to do so. So, Pat and Obata were in Topaz around the same time. And then later in life, Pat would go on to take ink painting classes from one of Obata's students as Pat became interested in making art later in life. But Pat is also somebody who he himself is a part of Asian American history. In the 1960s, there were many civil rights movements and student activist movements. And it's from this moment in 1968, actually, where we get the term Asian American. It's coined in the Bay Area by student activists who were looking for a different term, something to represent this larger community rather than the word Oriental. And so this is where Asian American comes from. And Pat was one of those student activists who was there at Berkeley demanding for greater diversity in the curriculum. This is the time when you have a lot of different ethnic studies departments being established in the Bay Area. And then Pat becomes one of the first professors in that department. I mean, all this time, he's always just like, I didn't know what I was doing, but there was nobody who knew what they were doing. So we were just all not knowing what to do together. So I became one of the teachers, even though I was a student, shortly prior. And then he kind of works his way up to becoming the vice chancellor of admissions at Berkeley. And that's what he did for a very long time. And he spent a large part of his career advocating against the use of standardized testing in admissions because he believed them to be biased forms of evaluation. And I'm inclined to agree. And so, I met Pat, then I was just like, wow, you're such an amazing person. You're such a hero. And I'm just so glad that I met you through doing this work. And so in the show at the Cantor, we had a little bit more square footage. So I had a little text talking about Pat and his work and his life and activism alongside the collection that he had gifted to us that is on view in the show. This is just a couple other Obata-related things from the Cantor's collection. I love this photograph of him painting in the Sierras. Obata's primary concept and driving force in his career was this concept of great nature. He really had a strong belief in the power of nature, in the preservation of nature and respect of nature. And he was out there backpacking around with Ansel Adams as well, making work. And this is him after he is, released from the camps. There he is back in his beloved place in the Sierras. And then here is another drawing by Obata that was given to us by Obata's family, by his granddaughters. So they also caught wind of what we were doing, and some of the works that we have in our collection now are from his family. And this is of Tanfran, which is just south of San Francisco. It's now a shopping mall. So there's the Tanfran shopping mall, and there is notice of what it used to be there, but it's just it's all very strange. But speaking of Tanfran, one of my favorite collaborations that I worked on in the course of this show involves this particular drawing that Obata did that was of some of the first vegetables that were raised in Tanfran. So Tanfran was kind of the first detention point before they would be before Japanese folks would be shipped off into camps that were more interior, like Topaz. So they would set up these kind of detention centers along the coast, and then folks would be shipped further inland. But nevertheless, there they were trying to grow vegetables to supplement their rations, and Obata very sweetly makes a drawing of some green onions and what I thought looked like turnips or radishes. From this moment in time, from July in 1942. So if you are in the Bay Area and you are a gardener, as I am, and my partner and I are, there's this company called Kitazawa Seed Company, and their packaging is all like this. It's all these manila envelopes with this green stamped logo and imagery. It's very iconic, very recognizable, and we love their vegetables. I would buy the seeds often because they're heritage vegetables, or they're all kind of Asian vegetables, special kinds of Asian vegetables it's hard to find those seeds, quite frankly, if you're interested in growing them. And the Kitazawa brothers were also incarcerated during World War II. The company still exists, obviously, and it is one of the longest existing seed companies in the United States. And we had thought that, what if we what would Kitazawa say, given their personal history in relationship to the camps, to incarceration, if we approached them with a collaboration. Because normally they would have these kinds of drawings of their different vegetables on the front of the package. But we thought maybe we could replace that with this beautiful Obata drawing. And maybe they, could find some seeds that they would think would be appropriate to put in the package. I was looking for something to give away to folks at our opening of the exhibition. And they were very, very excited about this. So I was very thrilled that my cold email was received positively. And they were so thoughtful. They thought it was a turnip, so that we've collectively decided that it was a turnip. And they selected a turnip variety that could have been grown in Tanfran based on the weather conditions and the soil. of the area. And so it's a kind of Japanese heritage turnip variety. And so on the front, and that's the kanamachi, that's the name of the turnip. But then you have tombstone information, what we call it in a museum, of Obata and the name of the work. And then on the back, I wrote a summary of Obata's life, and a little bit about the Asian American Art Initiative, and about the Kitazawa Seed Company. And so these are real seeds you can plant. I have grown them myself, and a little QR code to planting directions. And if anybody's interested, I have hundreds of them left at the Cantor, so I brought about 30 of them here with me. If any of you are gardeners and would like to take some, Madeline has some to pass out. But this is just another way that I think museums can think creatively about how to do community partnerships, especially partnerships that are very local, right? This isn't, we're not going out to like big brand companies. We're really trying to look at the histories of the region and how they are interconnected together, and working with the real people who are preserving these histories and stories. So I don't know how these turnips are going to fare in Texas weather, so someone can report back on how they do. We're very cold and temperate and foggy out there, so you'll have to let me know. So I thought I would share with you just a few installation shots of what East of the Pacific looked like at the Cantor. So and there you can see this is where our land acknowledgement was written or was displayed, and it's on top of an archival photograph of a Chinese worker at Donner Pass, which is in the Sierras. And it's kind of just amazing to see the works come from a storage unit to go to the wall of a museum. I think people are very... you just like, you see something in a museum and it looks great because it's supposed to look great because, we've cleaned it up and the galleries has nice lighting. But sometimes you just encounter things, and it is also up to you as a curator to evaluate, what you think belongs and doesn't belong in a collection. So it's also just a reminder that yes, curators are making informed decisions, right? This is why we have an education and a background in this work, but also what museums do is partially subjective, and it is based on the opinions and thoughts of particular people, and that is how collections are formed. So if you have a museum that has never had a curator ever interested in Asian American art or history, your collection will probably reflect that. And a lot of American museum collections reflect that. And you can insert Asian American with Black American, with Latinx, with, any group who is historically underrepresented in museum spaces. This large Noguchi on the floor here is, as you can tell, is not here at the Carter. It is a very large, very heavy sculpture. And so we kept it at home, but it's a great work. And I just kind of wanted to close with just talking about an earlier precedent. Sometimes I think, or I see this a lot, and I'm slightly allergic to it, where museums and curators, they like to say in their exhibition summaries, this is the first presentation of blah, blah, blah. This is the first show that's ever been curated about this and that. And I just am do you know that for sure? Have you gone through every single exhibition record of every arts institution in the United States, or, and which art institutions are you looking at? Are you looking at the smaller galleries? For example, San Francisco State University Art Gallery, which is it's a small space. They don't have a collection at SFSU, but it's often university art museums and university art galleries that are doing the groundbreaking work in advance of larger institutions, which is in part why I really enjoy working at University Art Museum. The Cantor is free, by the way. It will and always will be free. Jane Stanford wanted it to be free for everybody. And because it's free, because we don't collect any revenue from ticket sales, it changes the way that we do our work. And SFSU is the same way. It means that the projects that we do are driven by intellectual desire, sometimes a moral obligation to do what's right, to help tell narratives that haven't been told. to do things that we think are compelling and interesting, regardless of whether or not our visitors know who these artists are, whose work we're presenting. And it's really rewarding in that way because we allow ourselves to talk about hard subjects, to go places that sometimes I wouldn't see a place like SF MoMA. I mean, no shade or whatever, fine. It can be shade. Like, we are serving a different kind of civic function. Let's put it that way. So when I started at the Cantor in 2018, Ruth Asawa was just somebody who was, and you can see her sculpture, her Tidewire sculpture in the very back of this image right here, who was just kind of coming into being known in the larger art world. And I had started working with her, or with their estate, on a larger Asawa project, which I didn't even mention and bring up here. But now she just had her first major posthumous retrospective close at SF MoMA, and it's now traveling to MoMA, as museum people call it, in New York, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it was only towards the end of her life did she ever make much money from her work. And she was considered a regional artist. She was described as like a housewife artist when she was alive. In critical reviews of her work, she just wasn't really well known. But it takes a place like SFSU doing this work like 30 years ago. And it takes a place like, the Cantor coming in later, decades after that, still really trying to do the same thing. So in 1995, a group of colleagues, Mark Johnson, Irene Poon, Diane Tani, they put together an exhibition called With New Eyes Towards an Asian American Art History in the West. And it is a historically significant show. It's not the first show of Asian American art, but it was really ambitious in its scope. It was trying to be a somewhat comprehensive survey of Asian American art in the history of the West. And that's something that people really still unfamiliar with at the time. And you can see some of these works in the show are now in the Cantor's collection. And the folks who curated the show, some of them are still around in the neighborhood. Mark Johnson, who is kind of a legendary scholar. He helped co-edit the book along with Stanford professor Gordon Chang, my colleague, Asian American Art and History, which remains the only textbook on Asian American art, which was published in 2008. This book came out of that exhibition. It came out of the research that they did to put this exhibition together because this is the 90s and they had to go look through microfilm and they had to go, request different kinds of documents to figure out who folks were in this pre-Google time. They did oral histories with people and they collected all of that material and they